Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Olsen-Day of the New York Times, and I am very pleased to welcome you to tonight's TimesTalks. We're live here in New York at the Times Center, live around the world on TimesTalks.com, and we are thrilled to present two award-winning actors now appearing in one of this year's most highly acclaimed films. These accomplished performers are the co-stars of The Theory of Everything, directed by Academy Award winner James Marsh. The new movie chronicles the life of renowned British theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking and his wife, Jane Wilde. The characters defy impossible odds and achieve more than they could ever have dreamed. It's an extraordinary cinematic experience and extraordinarily performed. You'll hear much more about our guests and the film in just a moment from our moderator. A culture reporter for the New York Times, she is the Times' new carpetbagger, your nytimes.com guide to the movie award season, from the red carpets to the Oscars, the news to the nonsense. Hollywood insiders and insider wannabes, and especially film lovers, must read The Carpetbagger, which uncovers the stories and the stakes that surround the race for the awards. So please join me in welcoming The Carpetbagger, New York Times reporter Cara Buckley, and our very special guests, Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones.
Well, welcome everybody, and welcome Eddie and Felicity. Thanks so much for joining us. They just came from a cocktail party, so they might be a bit sozzled, but that's all right. Keep things flowing smoothly. So I'm going to start off. You've both been doing a lot of talking for 2 months about theory of everything, and so Eddie, you must know a lot about string theory.
Don't start here, Carl.
Now, well, why don't we start off with how you came about into the roles? I've seen interviews with you, people asking, were you approached with the role? And I understand it took a bit of an audition, perhaps, to...
Yes, so back to the very beginning. Well, it started, I sent the script from my agent, and at first I was a little bit cautious because sometimes the word biopic doesn't always bode well for the female character, that she can be a little, there's not much to get your teeth into, and often it will be she smiles or she cries, moving between those two emotions. So it was wonderful to read the script and see a nuanced, complex, very strong woman, and a love story between two extraordinary individuals, and that the film in many ways was an exploration of love in all its guises, not just the first love, which can sometimes be a superficial love, but a marriage. And then also I was really struck by 3/4 of the way through the film is this exploration of this very unconventional relationship between three people, with Jonathan, Stephen, and Jane, and I really love that the film wasn't afraid to deal with some more difficult subject matter.
And what about you? How did it come about for you?
For me, it came about, I was very old-fashioned. I was sent a script, and I similarly thought it was going to be a biopic of Stephen's life, and was completely blown away by this incredibly sort of intricate and complicated love story. And when I knew that James Marsh was directing it, I'd seen his film Man on Wire, which I really thought was a breathtaking piece of work, and again was a film which sort of cosmetically was about one thing, but actually ended up being about something completely other. I thought that the idea of the subject matter and Anthony's script and James being the director was a riveting kind of combination. So I basically, I think, managed to persuade James to speak to me on the phone. He lives in Copenhagen, and we had a long conversation, and I did that thing that you do in job interviews of pretending you're really confident. He was like, how would you go about it? And I was like, well, this is how I'd go about it. Without a clue how I'd go about it. And basically he then came over to London, and we went to a pub, and it was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and he said, what do you want to drink? And I had a sort of existential crisis about this. I was like, what do I say? Do I go alcohol or non-alcohol? Is he going to judge me for that? And so I was like, I'll have a beer. And he said, okay, he'll have a beer, I'll have a coffee. And so at that point, he proceeded to have several cups of coffee and got very caffeinated and wired. And I had several pints. and basically what was amazing about that moment is we both expressed, or he showed his vulnerability to me of the fear and the responsibility, and I felt
his fear
and responsibility, and I felt the same. And I think it's lovely. I think Felicity, we all had that same feeling. It's a very, very unique circumstance and special to all of us that when you're playing people who are living, who are extraordinary, and who are going to see the film, you know that the stakes are pretty high. So we all kind of held hands and jumped in together.
And in preparing for, what is called motor neuron disease, which is similar to ALS, and in preparing for that role, I understood you both went and spent time with people who have the disease to just try and get inside what it feels like, what it looks like.
Yes, Eddie and I both worked in the theatre with a director, Michael Grandage, at the Donmar Warehouse. And it's very common practice in theatre to learn about the subject that the play is about, and that includes meeting experts and really understanding the material of the story. So it was great. We had lots of time to prepare before, and part of that in-depth preparation was understanding ALS, motor neuron disease. I personally hadn't had any direct contact with knowing what that entails. And so we were both let in this very intimate way into people's lives who were going through it then. Because obviously, with our discussions with Stephen and Jane, we're very different because they're looking at their relationship retrospectively. So it was very useful just to spend time with people going through that situation and finding the fortitude in these people, and people always finding humour in the situation and finding moments of just a family behaving in a very real way. And that's again what we found with Jane and Stephen. Talking to Tim, their youngest son, he would tell us that he would put swear words into Stephen's machine box and ride on Stephen's chair and things like that, which helped us to take away some of our fears in understanding the disease and its effect on the family.
And you obviously went really deep into understanding what it felt like as well.
I mean, it was interesting because there were various sides to that you had to sort of understand when approaching playing Stephen, and one of which was obviously what he's achieved as far as the astronomy is concerned, and but also the disease. And when we met, as we began to meet people, and it was maybe 30 or 40 people, there was a clinic in London at the Queen Square neurology clinic that we went every week or two. And we were introduced to people suffering from the disease.
In various stages.
And the generosity across the board by those people suffering, but also their families. I mean, that was what was so interesting. It wasn't just about learning the specifics of what the disease is. And it's interesting, you said motor neuron disease, ALS. I mean, one of the huge complications with this disease, it's been around for over 100 years, and they're basically struggling to get any closer to finding what causes it. And how to cure it. And that's a lot to do with investment, but also I think there is a sense of confusion because we call it MND, motor neuron disease in the UK. Here it's called ALS, and then Lou Gehrig's disease, and it has many different names. But one of the problems is there's just really very little you can do to prevent it. And many of the patients that we met would literally allow me to feel their hands and to feel their bodies and tell me specifics about their experiences, but also we got to meet their families and their carers and see the emotional cost.
which must have been very helpful for you to see, I guess, their fortitude and also their struggles.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's what was so important to neither Stephen nor Jane are saints. You know, they're dealing with a very difficult situation, but they're very both very driven people, and what was interesting is how for Stephen the illness is the least interesting thing for him. You know, it's always about something else, and so we wanted to capture that. It was very much trying to show these people, you know, having their own drives and desires, and actually that ultimately it's not a love story in the conventional way either. These people find happiness with other people. And that's what I found in meeting. I've spent time with a carer called Davina, who was incredibly candid about her experience, and a lot of the discussions were about how that relationship shifts between being a husband and wife, and then you become nurse and patient, and how, you know, that's very complicated for everyone involved. But we were so lucky. There was such openness and willingness to support us. One
thing that struck me was, and I guess anyone who's seen the film, your character, Stephen Hawking, was initially given a 2-year, like, you have 2 years to live. And does Stephen or Jane think that I think from the film it looks like Jane's fortitude and she's a staunch character. She's standing, every step of the way. Do you think that that's what helped extend his life, or is that too simple?
I would never want to claim that. I mean, the answer is no. Stephen has broken all the odds and was given 2 years to live, and is now 72 years old. And whether it's the specific strain of the illness, whether it's to do with, as you say, his passion and his and Jane's support. I mean, I'm sure it's a combination of all of those things, but I'd be very wary saying it was just one specific thing. As I said, it's a disease that they still know quite little about, and that with that whole the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge this year, I feel like it is something that is people are becoming more aware of, but it is there was one patient I met who described it as it's like being in a prison, with the prison walls getting closer every day, and it's a really horrific thing to live with.
Why don't we look at one of the first clips we have? It's when Stephen starts seducing Jane with his knowledge about laundry detergent and its effects.
It really got her going.
It's
yes.
riveting. So can we see that first clip?
You see how the men's shirt fronts and the bow ties, how they glow more than the women's dresses?
Yes.
Do you know why?
Why?
Tide.
The washing powder.
The fluorescence in the washing powder is caught by the UV light.
Why do you know that?
When stars are born and when they die, they emit UV radiation. So if we could see the night sky in the ultraviolet light, then almost all the stars would disappear, and all that we would see are these spectacular births and deaths. I reckon it would look a little
Like that.
Primitive flirt.
It's lovely, though, and there's that obvious chemistry between the characters. But I also understand, was Stephen on set for that scene?
They were both on set.
They were on either side of us.
Yeah.
There's a bit where we're just walking away, and we had each of our respective characters. Feels weird calling them characters because they're real people, but on either side of us. So it was pretty intimidating.
Yeah, I would say so. And I understand when you first met Stephen, did you say something about, I'm sorry, I studied art history, and you tried to connect that you both are of the same astrological sign?
Thank you for bringing that one up as well. My God, all the clangers are coming out tonight. Good. No, so basically, well, both of us had spent 4 months researching Stephen and Jane, and But Stephen at the time was promoting his documentary called Hawking, and was also busy. He's solving some quite hardcore problems out in the universe, and so he's quite a busy man. And so we could only meet him just before we started filming, and it was complicated because by that point, because we weren't shooting the film chronologically, we'd had to in some ways map out the arc of the piece, and then the fear was, what if we meet both Stephen and Jane and we realise that all the work that we've done is completely wrong, basically. So by that point, the stakes were high. I felt very nervous, and I walked in to meet him. And he now, since his tracheotomy, he has 24-hour care, and he has a team of nurses. And I was introduced to Stephen, and now he just uses this muscle beneath his eye to communicate. So he has a screen with the alphabet and a cursor that goes across the alphabet, and when he moves this muscle, it stops on one letter. So the rhythm when you meet him, when you speak to him, is so unique, and there are long pauses. And as Felicity knows, I have a hatred of silence. So I basically just started filling the silence with information about him, and I just kept. It was really bad. I mean, and I kept sort of just genuinely telling him information about himself, anyway. So it just got to a really particularly awful moment in which he had just published an autobiography in which he talked about how he was born 300 years to the day after Galileo, and that date was the 8th of January, and I was telling him this about himself, and I then said, and actually it's funny because actually you're born on the 8th of January and I'm born on the 6th, so we're both Capricorns. and it was, as I said it, this just sort of ream of sweat just started pouring down my face, and he took about 6 or 7 minutes to write his response, and then he said, it was the second thing he said to me, was, "I am an astronomer, not an astrologer." and we had a long, we spent a couple of hours together, and I haven't seen him since.
But I mean, he saw the film and then lent his voice to the film, right?
Yes, he's been a huge support of it, actually, which you don't always expect, and it is a responsibility taking on their lives. But Stephen Hawking he never comes out with what you expect. And apparently somebody asked him, Stephen Hawking, what is the greatest mystery in the world? And he just paused and he wrote, women. Which is so Stephen. So at first it is quite intimidating meeting him. He always twists language, and he has this manner and this tone. So you really do feel like you're trying to get into his good books. But so the fact that he then saw the film later and responded very emotionally to it is means so much from someone like him.
And he just started a Facebook account and then just posted this wonderful comment, right? That he said, looking up at this, he thought you were him. I mean, that's pretty.
It's the greatest day of my life. No, he's been so generous. And the interesting thing is, when Felicity and I met both Jane and Stephen before we started filming, of course, we did have that fear, and all you really want is approval.
Right.
But they're not. They're brilliant, strong, sensationally bright people who are not going to just hand that out willy-nilly, and I just used the word willy-nilly. Oh God! But
it's
that's
fine,
awful.
It's fine.
So there was always. But we sort of hoped for that to begin with. But actually, it was only after seeing the film that they were,
They gave the full.
Yeah, and it's been lovely.
Yeah, they're very. There's an unsentimentality to both of them, and that's what struck us when we met them. And there's that sort of thing that you think they're sort of very English and proper, and then there is something very rock and roll about both of them, and they are people that you want them to respect you. I think that's why we both became so obsessive and wanted to play them honestly, because they are extraordinary. They're complicated and nuanced, and it was a pleasure to play them.
And you had the book, right? You had Jane Hawking's book. I mean, was that just a constant resource in terms of figuring out your character.
Absolutely. Well, Jane she is an academic and has a very amazing memory. So literally we could look back in the book and it'd be like, what was happening on Monday the 30th of July? And there'd be a very sort of in-depth description of what was going on in their relationship, where they were traveling to. They were constantly traveling around the world as Stephen's fame was growing, and they were touring and getting flights but it's also detailed about her mental and emotional state as she was feeling throughout the relationship. So I mean, it was an actor's dream, because it was almost like a stream of consciousness. So I'd constantly sort of be underlining things and reading it and getting other details in my trailer before going out to set. But actually meeting that you have an idea of someone when you're prepping, but meeting both of them was when it really started to grow. And with Jane, I was just obsessed with the way she moves, and actually I'm doing it loads, but she has the way she moves her hands is incredible, and there was something very dancer-like, which was a way into playing her.
Did she ever despair? I mean, I haven't read the books, but were those moments?
Oh, definitely. Very, very honest moments of feeling a desperation. But, you know, as you would in that situation for both of them. But it was always about, it wasn't a self-pitying thing for either of them. It was, how do we keep this relationship surviving? And that's what the film is in many ways, it goes beyond a superficial love. It's how do we get through this next thing so we can stay together? And interestingly, it was a very unusual situation to be in this three-person relationship, but that was another method to help them to stay together, even though it was unconventional.
Right. And for you, when you were preparing for the role, when we met in Toronto, you were saying how you needed to see some kind of a specialist after different days of shooting because your body was in so much pain.
When we started rehearsing, I decided to work with a dancer, a woman called Alex Reynolds, who's used to be a contemporary dancer and is a choreographer and has worked on film as well. And she and I went to a lot of the clinics together and really tried to track the specifics of what Stephen's decline was. And one of the first things she said when I met her actually was, you should start seeing an osteopath now. And in that 4-month period, as we were sort of training, because when you shoot films, you're doing lots and lots of takes, so a lot of the positions you're sustaining for extended periods. It was about as you would if you were an athlete, teaching those muscles to get used to those positions. And so this wonderful gentleman called Dan, who's an amazing osteopath, he started basically tracking and throughout the process, he was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, your spine's doing weird and wonderful things. I think I'm going to write an essay on you. I was saying to someone last night, I was like, it's not what you want to hear from your osteopath. Like, all you want to hear from your osteopath is that you're totally normal, everything's completely aligned, you're going to be absolutely fine. But it was helpful, and through the filming as well. But the most important thing was every day, if you were in the wheelchair, you got to get up. And you got to leave at the end of the day, and many of the people we met couldn't do that. And so the other thing about making this film is you were just constantly aware of how lucky you are.
You know, we kept saying, we'd get to the end of the shooting and we'd be like, we're so exhausted, can't believe we're so tired. And then you'd think, no, these people were living this every day, all the day, and it's not something, as Eddie said, it's not something you can just leave behind at the end of the day.
They were both pioneers in doing this, and Jane, schlepping around that wheelchair, I mean, it was just this huge amount of work, but she was a scholar, and she kind of gave some of that up, right, to care for her husband?
Yeah, I think she was very much a woman of the 50s, where there was still a mentality that a lot of her responsibilities were to be a good wife and mother. But what I felt with her is that she was almost at the forefront of the sexual revolution, in a way that she's starting to find, that she has her own desires and needs, and there's a need to balance that and balance those different roles. But it's a difficult one to achieve, definitely. But in terms of hate going to the gym, but I suddenly realized when we started working and I was sort of lifting these wheelchairs and moving and lifting children, I was like, I need to start working out. This is like heavy lifting, literally. It was a combination of her enormous physical strength that you need in that situation, and emotional strength.
But also that I think that there's been there was a tiny little scene in the film that didn't make it into the film, but in which what Jane did for disabled rights and access was pretty extraordinary. I mean, she was really, because Stephen became famous, he was an icon of, and it was also a period in which she did extraordinary things.
Well, that's what, and I think with disability, there's a lot of fear around it, and people can be very patronising, and I do feel like that's something that Stephen and Jane have both fought is to be, that's never the thing that should dictate your response. They've always just been front-footed about it, and very much in that vein. Just Cambridge, just at the time, was not built for a wheelchair of any description. There's particularly like windy staircases that there seem to be a lot of in Cambridge. So yeah, she was always trying to get things changed and to get ramps built in a very sort of activist mentality.
Going back to the physicality of the role, James Marsh said you did a chart that was like a sacred text to him. Do you know?
Yeah.
Can you flick? Because they didn't shoot the film in order, right? And so you might do one scene one day and then the next day it's 10 years ago. So you have to change physically according to where Stephen was, right?
Yeah.
From day to day.
That is true, but James, unfortunately, it's so difficult nowadays to make films chronologically. It really doesn't happen. Because if you're shooting in Cambridge, exteriors in Cambridge, it costs quite a lot of money to shut down Cambridge for a day. And so all of that stuff is, and actually our first week shooting was in Cambridge. And our first day filming was, for both of us, a trial by fire, because we had to play each of our characters at completely different ages within the same day. But we'd been told that by James, and that was part of, and we'd been given time, which is really rare on film. And but yes, in the end, through working with this specialist, she, by taking old photos of Stephen to her, she could work out which muscles stopped working when. And we would then, I wrote a sort of thing of each of the scenes and which muscle was going when, and which glasses he was wearing, and which whether he was on one walking stick or two, or which
whether
chair
Jane
he was
had
in.
her Dorothy Hamill haircut.
Yes,
Exactly.
the different hair lengths.
And it became a sort of, it was our way, and how many children we had, and important things like that.
I know, there'd always be a different baby, and we'd be like, is
Lucy
this
or Robert?
Robert or Lucy? Which one is it? It's like, it doesn't matter, just shoot it. Yeah, it was.
It was actually
was-
a day, wasn't there? We were like,
There was a day when we weren't sure which one of our children it was, but we probably shouldn't say that.
it was so method.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, well, it just comes from, I love the idea of back in the day that you'd make films over sort of 5 months, but often it is compressed with this kind of film, which is a drama. There isn't always the time. So we'd be jumping between being in our mid-40s to then suddenly being innocent and naive and starting off when they first meet when they're 18 and 20. Yeah, exactly. Facelift.
And then coupled with these big physical, challenges, there's also he's Stephen Hawking. So how did you begin, both of you, to try and understand theoretical physics?
How long have you got?
Well, James, Eddie and I all studied literature, art subjects at university, so there'd be really comical attempts at trying to discuss black hole theory with each other, which would start off with the best intentions.
With really sincere faces.
Yeah. And be like, so is it this? And then it would quickly deteriorate, and realized we had to resort to other means of understanding physics, which would usually be physics for dummies or for 11-year-olds. So
Yeah. No, there was a...
That was our way into it.
Our conversations, all of them would start with, no, but basically. Like we were desperately trying to... And you realise that you can't do that with astronomy. There is no basically. It's like you either have to understand all the intricacies in order to understand, and particularly with Stephen, I mean, what one of the complexities and what I think Anthony, the writer, managed to do beautifully in the script is that, you know, Stephen didn't discover the black hole. He didn't. There wasn't sort of one epiphany to those people like us who are laymen, you know, you can instantly latch onto. It was what he did was incredibly profound and extraordinary, but it involves having a certain amount of knowledge to begin with, and so how Anthony wove that into the script, I thought was pretty, or certainly I think James ended up, as Felicity was saying, he was like, well, we're all art students, we don't have a clue, we all gave up science when we were children. If we understand it, then maybe that's the sort of denominator.
And did you get to some understanding?
Of course. No,
Intimately.
there was a very embarrassing moment when Stephen's old student, who's now a professor at Imperial College in London, he was helping me. He was one of our sort of experts, and he was talking to me about the intricacies of string theory and sort of wormholes, which apparently would help me with Interstellar, but I haven't seen yet. But
didn't you say before that that's one of the reasons you're sort of putting it off because you're worried that people will ask you about the science?
People keep going, I want you to explain Interstellar to me, and I'm going, okay, yeah. So for the moment, I haven't seen it yet, so I keep going, I will once I've seen it, you know. But I think I might leave. No, but this gentleman ended up, you know, trying to teach me all the details, and I had to say, like, let's go back to what an atom equals. Like, how does it start? You know.
Right. Well, why don't we look at, there's another clip. It's a very sweet clip. It's sort of when you, Jane, basically you've received the diagnosis, and you basically say, I'm going to stay with him. So if we could see that would be great.
Leave me now.
Are you going to talk about this or not?
Please, will you just go?
Is that what you want?
Yes, it is what I want, so please, if you care about me at all, then please just go.
I can't.
I have 2 years to live. I need to work.
I love you.
You've left that's a false conclusion.
I want us to be together for as long as we've got, and if that's not very long, well, then that's just how it is. It'll have to do.
You don't know what's coming. It'll affect everything.
Your glasses are always dirty. There. That's better, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Did they talk to you about that scene? Was that a scene in Jane's book?
That's a good question. I mean, it was a very much she talks about when they first meet, and there was this tension as when Stephen was diagnosed, that he, you know, didn't want to, was worried about burdening Jane, and sort of wanted to deal with it on his own, and
he listened to a lot of Wagner, didn't he?
And got quite sort of depressed. And he said in his documentary, that Stephen made a documentary about his life and work, and he said how together they'd sort of, Jane had lifted him out of this depression. So it is definitely rooted in the reality of what was going on at that time.
But what's interesting watching that scene is that was an amazing, James Marsh, our director, was extraordinary that day, because it was one of there are various scenes often in a film script that you read that are the kind of things that a lot of the other stuff is pegged on. and that was one that we knew was important, and we couldn't get it, and we did it for the first half of the day, and time is...
It was so awful.
It was really bad.
What was happening? Was it just off, or?
It was histrionic. I think we were so aware that it had to be a big scene that we were perhaps going at it too hard, maybe. Or,
yeah, you have those certain scenes in the screenplay that you're sort of a little bit nervous about, and you keep thinking about it, and then you're just sort of slightly dreading the day when they come. And there were a few moments, I think they're turning point moments, and that was one of them. And then there's the moment when sort of the twin moment is when they split up, when Stephen goes to America with Elaine. And so I think we were just a bit cautious about it, and probably we both have a tendency to overthink, and
Well, I mean, we've got Oxford and Cambridge graduates here.
But yeah, so it just sort of took a few takes to loosen up, I think, and make fools of ourselves.
What was lovely is that, because time is a real thing on film. Before I started working on film, I always thought, everyone always says, yeah, but you've got more takes. You can have more takes, but the reality is that you're always under the gun on a film set. There's never enough time, and it's rare that you... And what was extraordinary about what James did that day is he stopped us as we'd gone in with our instincts and gone... It was quite a fiery, sort of hardcore, passionate scene, but we'd got it all wrong. And then he came in the middle of the day, and we stopped all of that and started all over again, and it was very... It sounds silly, but it takes great bravery to do that when you actually realise you have to start the whole thing again and you don't have time to do it.
Yeah, when the producers are sort of like tapping their watches, going, "Time is money, time is money." But James was always he's very good. He's a very sensitive director, and he'll let you play and. Without sounding too actory, and let you get on with it. But he's amazing at when he needs to. He'll come in and say, "Look, let's just go back. Let's start again and go back to the drawing board."
And had you two met before or worked before together?
We'd never worked together, but we'd first met when I was auditioning for a film that Felicity was cast in about 10 years ago, which never happened. I didn't get cast.
The film,
and it was, but
so the film didn't happen.
The film never happened. It was a long line of Eddie and I just being turned down for a lot of work.
Exactly. We were endlessly being screen tested.
Yeah, exactly.
Never really working. Yeah.
And then they'd find someone else.
Yeah.
So.
But we started in the same theatre as well in London. There's a place, as Felicity was talking about earlier, the Donmar Warehouse, beautiful little theatre in London, and this director Michael Grandage, who was great supporters of both of ours, and so we'd been friends. And the wonderful thing about this film was that it involved such a sort of intimacy and trust that it was great. And we both worked in the UK, but also over here in film with different directors who had different practices, and we were both so aware of not just going back into our sort of my staid way of working, but shaking each other up a bit and using techniques that we'd learnt from other directors, and so it was. But that involves trust, so it was great.
Yeah, we were keen to. We didn't want it to feel in any way a stuffy costume drama. That it constantly felt, timeless in some way, because the emotions are timeless. And actually, we both were fans of the film Splendour in the Grass, which was a huge influence on those early scenes on getting the sort of, that first love and the infatuation and the passion. But it was always from the very beginning. It was a very collaborative, open process. And because Stephen and Jane were very reliant on each other, we needed to build that trust between us.
And did you have a lot of time before production began to sort of work on that and to figure out how is this going to work between us?
We had both worked for a few months by ourselves, but we only had a week or two together. But that became really interesting, because that relationship, as Stephen loses, or as the illness takes hold, he becomes so reliant on Jane that it becomes like a dance between them. She becomes an extension of his body.
She's interpreting everything, right?
Exactly that, and not only but also not only the spoken word, which she literally interprets, but also the physical. And there's one beautiful bit of documentary in which Stephen and Jane are in the garden with the kids, and he's in his chair, and his head falls, and Jane is having a conversation, and almost without looking, she just gently places his head back onto and there's a sort of sixth sense quality, and James was so keen, the director, to shoot us in almost like a documentary fashion at moments, that we needed to have that sixth sense quality, and that was something that we worked on for those.
Yeah, it was building that intuition, so you're not sort of going, oh, is it okay if I move your arm here? Or, you want it to be totally automatic.
Second nature.
Exactly, as it was for them. Mm-hmm. But watching the documentary footage was an amazing resource all the way through. We'd come back, and it's interesting how in reality you find so many interesting things which are then great to put in the film. And there were moments of Stephen loves the taste of alcohol, and there was a scene where he was had champagne on a spoon and being fed it, and I remember Eddie coming in the next day having seen this and saying, we should put that into the film, and how can we get all that texture and that reality into our playing of it. So we were constantly trying to root it in what we'd seen in the documentary footage.
One thing that you mentioned earlier that I didn't know was that you said Stephen Hawking was a bit of a womanizer.
Did I say the words womanizer? I'm not sure I did.
Maybe, maybe a fan of women.
Yeah, no, definitely he is. And when you meet him now...
And there's sort of a full circle thing, because he was in love with Marilyn Monroe, and as anyone who has seen My Week with Marilyn knows, Eddie and Marilyn.
No, there's definitely when you meet Stephen, he has a love of women, as Felicity was saying. His great confusion in the world has always been, the great unsolved theory is women. And you meet him now, and he has an electric personality and a vivacious one, an incredibly attractive one. But he was always obsessed with Marilyn, and he always said that if he could travel back in time, he would go and meet Marilyn Monroe, and to the extent that he has above his desk in Cambridge a photograph of him with a Marilyn Monroe lookalike behind him, and I kept seeing it in all the documentaries. It was always there in the background, and so I said to James, as basically a slightly pathetic in-joke to myself, could we have a moment in which we recreate that photograph? And I don't know. It's basically when I watch the film, I'm like, oh, no one else finds it in any way entertaining.
It's a good moment.
Yeah.
I like it. It's good.
Yeah. No, he's such a charismatic man.
He is. Yeah.
And how does he? Being with him, how does he transmit that? How do you feel that? Seeing that he's obviously brilliant.
Yeah.
But obviously, he's like you described, a prisoner of sorts.
Well, what's amazing, it's like the way I describe it is every facility that we have to communicate, whether it's gesture or tone of voice or even choice of word, it's like all of those attributes and energies are taken to those few muscles that he can use. And so even though he can use very few muscles on his face, he has by far and away the most charismatic face I've ever seen.
Wow.
And
he has this amazing grin.
Yeah.
This amazing smile that just lights up his whole face. So you've said something funny when you earn the grin.
It's the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah, which is
it only happened to me once.
Was it after you both discovered you were Capricorns?
Something like that.
And I saw too when you were practicing for the role, you said you were working with your eyebrows a lot. Is that right? Can you?
Yeah.
What was that?
So that was because Jane and actually Stephen's mum had always described how he had incredibly expressive eyebrows, and that had helped him as the disease took hold of him. Because, and so a lot of people who suffer from ALS, when they use what's called the E-trans board, this board that he uses to communicate just after he has the tracheotomy, they would blink. Stephen would always use his eyebrows. So, and even now, again, it's such expression.
Well, and that was very much a theme of the film is communication and how they constantly having to adapt to the changes in Stephen's physicality, and on both sides, for Stephen, the frustration sometimes of having someone else have to be his voice in the world, and we were constantly trying to explore that. There's a scene when Jane is describing Stephen's theories, and it's sort of two-sided, because Jane is enjoying being able to say how, you know, how much she appreciates his work and explain the science behind it, but also there's an element too of Stephen sort of having to trust someone else to be your voice in the world is a complicated situation.
Let's see. Well, one of the things I was talking to you about before too, you've answered so many questions over and over again.
Is that what it seems like?
But when you're speaking about it, how do you keep it, you know, you're promoting this wonderful film, how do you keep it for yourselves, like fresh in terms of describing these roles?
Because it's a continuing thing. Because not only do you spend those 4 or 5 months researching, and you're lucky enough to be introduced to not only Stephen and Jane and the family, but also to people, extraordinary people who are suffering from this illness, and hearing their stories. You then have the world of the science. You then go through the process of making the film, and you do that in almost the myopia of what your character is going through, and you just see it in that. And then you eventually see the film as a whole. It's like you read it once as a script, you then went into your own journey through it, and then you see it as a whole again, and then it weirdly takes on a whole new life in retrospect. And what's been amazing for us about this film is there are so many elements to, whether it is the science or the love story or the family or the specifics of the disease, there is so much colour that actually, certainly for me, above and beyond any film I've ever done, it does stay fresh. And amazing things. I got to go to Intel the other day, who are the guys who sponsor Stephen and are working on his on this technology, because as his muscles are stopping to work, how does he keep communicating? And these guys, specialists in that technology world, meeting, you know, so they're fascinating people, and the story remains. It's what's still happening.
So he's continuing to. What does he have left to communicate with? Is it just his eye now? Or?
So at the moment he has glasses with a sensor, and then this computer screen with the alphabet, and when the cursor goes across, he just moves this muscle and it stops on a letter. But then he has an interface almost like predicted text. But what's really complicated is that it's a bit like, I don't know if you guys find, but whenever you get a new phone,
right,
you're like, I loved the way the old one worked. Like, I don't understand how to navigate this thing. And Paul, you know, Stephen's had to negotiate so many different moments of technology. It's like, how much more can, and they've been doing such interesting work there, but and they continue to have an amazing relationship with him, but it's so.
I like that he sticks to the older technology as well. That he's, you know, he could have like the very latest in speech technology, but he's very used to the system as it is, and he likes it very much, and that's part of his identity is that voice, and that machine has almost become part of his physicality.
And for you, so you have gotten validation from Stephen, like of the highest order, the compliments, and what have you had Jane's feedback?
Yes, well, throughout filming, I would, Eddie and I both went and met Jane and Jonathan, and had a very English way, sat and had cups of tea and had dinner with them, and became very close. And it had actually taken 8 years before Jane agreed to have the film made of her book. So she was very, very protective of the material and who was involved.
Do you know
why? Because of the sensitive nature of it, because it is a very intimate portrayal of their lives, she wanted to make sure it was in the right hands, and that was very important to her. So she felt confident with working title and with Anthony McCartan, and so we definitely, it was about getting her blessing was very, very important, and throughout the process, I would sort of get a text from Jane saying, "Hello, Jane. Just wanted to see how you're getting on today, you know." And I had a thought. There's this outfit that I'd love you to see. It was what I was wearing when Steve and I first met, and you know, so she was very, very involved. Actually, there was a moment when she ran up to Eddie when she'd come to set and restyled his hair and sort of said, Stephen's hair wouldn't be like that. So literally hands-on. And then throughout...
Show us what the hair was.
Yeah, it was very messy. It was you know, she was cycling past. It was the most wonderful, sort of quintessentially Cambridge moment. She was like, no, his hair would be much messier. It was just the most amazing thing to get your hair styled by.
And she was a little bit upset that Jonathan has a beard in real life and in the film he doesn't, and that was she was very, you know, she was like to be. She has quite a pedantic mind in many ways.
What was it Lucy said?
Oh, Lucy. So, because it is really difficult for this family to see, you know, in many ways to see this film being made of their lives, but luckily we had a really effusive email from Lucy, the youngest daughter, who's very, very sweet. But her one criticism was, I actually was a little bit more punk rock than you portrayed me in the film, because in the film she's in this very conservative outfit in a sort of like sailor dress. So we're happy that was the only criticism. But no, Jane's been very. I spoke to her on the telephone, and she was very, very supportive and loved the performances and the emotional truth of the film.
It's one of these amazing coincidences too, that just as, you know, the Ice Bucket Challenge sort of sweeps America at least, and Britain, you know, that the film comes out at the same time as this is happening. Have you had responses from people in the, you know, in the
ALS community?
ALS community, motor neuron disease?
We have actually. We had a lot of the people that I work with specifically are coming to the London premiere who haven't seen it, but in New York and in Los Angeles there
some
were
of the people who were diagnosed.
Yeah, yeah, but there were people who were suffering from ALS who came to the premieres, and they've been incredibly generous. I mean, I think for them, firstly, Stephen is a great bastion of hope because he's defied all expectation. But also it's about awareness, and I feel like what I was sort of saying before, but the Ice Bucket Challenge has brought the term ALS into the to the public sort of consciousness, but some people don't know the reality of what the disease is and what the consequences are on the people suffering and also the people caring for, and the families. And again, it's been around for a long, long time, and they're struggling to get any closer. So I really do hope that the awareness will encourage people to not only donate but also for the medical community to keep doing good work.
And did you two have to do it too then?
I'm yet to be challenged, so
Wow.
I can't believe I didn't challenge you.
Did you? No.
I did it. I did do it. I was challenged by a London DJ called Zoe Ball.
Right.
And I challenged and it was very cold, but there was this extraordinary moment in which you realise, because it's being filmed, no one can tell whether the water's cold or not. So you had this sort of huge moral dilemma about whether you're like, maybe I could just put ice cubes in, but do it with like warm water. But no, but I was doing it with a pal, and we took. It was very cold. So it was
a lot of incredible torsos from that whole time were revealed.
Not mine, but the greatest one was Stephen's. I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's worth going and looking up Stephen's Ice Bucket Challenge because it's pretty brilliant.
I think we have one more clip. I think it's when you're getting your PhD, like you do in real life, right? You have that
all the time.
Yes. So why don't we see the third clip?
And then, of course, we have chapter 4, this black hole at the beginning of time.
Space-time singularity.
Indeed. It's brilliant. Brilliant, Stephen. Superb. And therefore, all there is to say is well done. Or perhaps I should say, to be more precise, well done, Doctor.
Bravo, Stephen.
An extraordinary theory.
Thank you.
So what next?
Prove it. To prove with a single equation that time had a beginning. Wouldn't that be nice, Professor? So one simple, elegant equation to explain everything.
Yes, it would. It would indeed.
Thank you.
So what is space-time singularity?
A really
No.
complicated thing that happen in space.
When I met you in Toronto, what struck me, when did you finish filming?
We finished about this time last year.
We did the end of November. Yeah, it's been very quick coming to Toronto.
You had developed, I think, you had built different muscles in your face, and I remember when you were speaking about Stephen, this was only 2 months ago, your mouth was changing almost as if you were going into the role. Did you build like muscles on one side of your face?
There was a weird thing because you see that's just the beginning of it in that. But he does talk. He did talk from that right side of his face, and because and also a lot of even when he can't talk, the communication is these muscles move up here. So there was a moment in which Jan Sewell, our amazing makeup designer, was like, Eddie, I think you're beginning to get more lined and like muscles on this side of your face, and so it's been. Yeah, I'm now doing a lot of this. No, but it's been. What is interesting is also that through this process, for both of us, we were looking at so much documentary material, and because we weren't shooting chronologically, we asked James if we could see the dailies. So you'd see all the footage you did each day, and that's really rare. And most directors would say no, and James allowed us that. And what happened was you would then have one iPad filled with all the documentary material, and then the truth of, and then your dailies, and you were so hoping these two things would get close together. And what's weird is even now when I see the film, you're still seeing the things you don't, and that's why the sort of muscles start going, because you're trying to sort of perfect what it is that you didn't quite get right. But yeah, so no, that was an extraordinary part of it, was trying to replicate that stuff.
I did want to revisit something that you said about the woman who became Stephen's second wife, the actress who played her.
Yeah.
And that your mom was almost more excited than you even had the role. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
The actress who plays Elaine is a woman called Maxine Peake,
who was his caretaker, who went on to be his second wife.
His second wife, and she
he left Jane
is the most amazing, brilliant actress, and she's currently playing Hamlet in Manchester, I think, at the moment. And my mum was so thrilled because she does extraordinary, mainly television work and theatre work in the UK. And my mum was like sort of so elated. In fact, Mum came to set especially to come and see her one day, I think. Yeah.
It's because she plays this amazing, formidable female barrister in this film. So our mums are obsessed with it. It's one of the best characters created on TV. It's really, really worth watching.
And she's played. Anyway, she's such a versatile actress. And what she had to do in the film was, and Charlie had to do, who plays Jonathan.
And Harry Lloyd as well.
They had to come in and with very little material, really create relationships. The balance of the film was so important that you believed that the love between Jane and Stephen, but also the complications of these other dynamics. And certainly for Charlie and Maxine, they had so little in which they had to create so much.
Well, it's actually much harder in a sense to just come in and do an odd day here and there. You know, when you're in it every day, you relax and you lose your self-consciousness. But they had a really difficult time coming in and doing these parts, but they bring such nuance even to the smallest moments. Actually, some of my favourite moments are with Harry Lloyd. He shows how protective he is of his friend in a very, very subtle way.
All right. Well, listen. Thank you all, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.